Good afternoon. We're glad to welcome you to our SAP Tech Talks webinar. Before jumping to the main part of our event, a few words about the organization. The webinar will be recorded and then posted on the SAP Tech Talks YouTube channel. Also, we encourage you to ask your questions in the Q&A section. The author of the best question will get a prize from our community. Well, it's time to get down to the main part of our webinar, a panel discussion with top SAP experts, Thomas Jung, Aliaksandr Shchurko, and Dmitry Frydliand. I give the floor to our speakers.
Thank you, Anna. Today we have a super special guest in our SAP Tech Talk. That's why we decided to have a panel discussion before the technical talk. So my name is Dmitry Frydliand. I'm heading the SAP Competency Center at EPAM. And today we have Thomas Jung, Head of Developers Advocacy at SAP, and Aliaksandr Shchurko, Head of SAP Architecture at EPAM. And Thomas, the first question, we haven't talked for a while. We had a similar talk 2 years ago, but probably technologies changed a bit. So the first question to you, where did the SAP technology go? So how this gonna work?
Where's the SAP technology go? Well, I think there's the obvious continuation of the one trend, which is moving to the cloud. That may seem like we've been hearing about that for a number of years, right? But everything in the SAP ecosystem takes a while to really catch on. Companies have large systems that run their entire corporation, so it takes a number of years for them to adapt and change the things as big as the move to the cloud. But we're starting to see more and more momentum there, and I think customers are also starting to see that moving to the cloud doesn't mean that you have to necessarily move your entire IT infrastructure and landscape to the cloud. That things like SAP BTP can be used alongside your on-premise existing software, SAP, non-SAP, and to really be able to do some of that development that would be too disruptive if you did it directly in your current systems, or too costly. That it gives you options to build solutions, extensions, enhancements that run side by side with your current software, and we see more and more customers doing that. I think
technology-wise, what would it mean? I mean,
Pardon me?
before technology-wise, before this call, I checked in LinkedIn and I found 300,000 of ABAP developers. There are, I've been for a while in Waldorf, and there are like 20 more thousands different those who were building the SAP NetWeaver products for 20 years. What those people will do? So what is their path?
Well, I would imagine many of them will continue to leverage the same skill set that they have today, and that's part of the value of what we're doing. If you look at BTP and you look at the programming models, there's two main programming models. One is the ABAP-based RESTful application programming model, and one is the JavaScript-based cloud application programming model. And we try to address the needs of a very diverse ecosystem. We need interoperability with non-ABAP solutions. We need to be able to pull in developers into the ecosystem. Because although you go on LinkedIn, you find X number of ABAP developers, there's probably X plus a number of open positions out there too. There's a shortage in people with good ABAP developer experience. So we need to have a way to bring in the Java and the JavaScript developers and whatever else from outside the ecosystem, and make them be successful, fruitful SAP developers as well in our ecosystem. But at the same time, we need to allow our customers and our partners to take their existing ABAP skill sets and use them in the cloud as well, without having to learn a new programming language, without necessarily having to learn a completely new development paradigm. Now, that's not to say there aren't some differences with ABAP Cloud, the version that's available in S/4HANA on-premise, S/4HANA Cloud, and on BTP. So I use that term interchangeably between all three of those, but it kind of is a next generation ABAP that gets rid of some of the old stuff. So, no SAP GUI, no list processing, things like that. But at its heart, it's the same programming language, the same architecture that you've known for years. So you can bring your existing skill set and be very efficient very quickly, but then start creating cloud-based extensions that that sit alongside your core application, whether that's in the cloud or on premise.
Okay. And maybe the next question, Sasha, to you, because you speak to the customers, I would say daily. What is their preference? Or how do they select whether it's RAP, whether it's CAP, and if it's CAP, then what? Java or Node.js? What the background behind?
Usually, it's a long story in advance coming, because usually I'm able to implement any architecture on any platform. And at the beginning, usually we are preparing, let's say, logical architecture that you're able to implement on any platform that you wish. It can be ABAP, it can be Cloud Foundry, it can be Kima. And depends on the quality attributes, of course, and depends on ability to operate Cloud Foundry, operate Kima together with Kubernetes, or how many ABAP developers do you have, and would you like to utilize them, or maybe you would like to do the transition path for them, and maybe you would like to move all your ABAP developers to another world. Maybe they need to do the Java or something else. That is why so many really important questions to the customer you need to ask in advance. And of course, when we are speaking about scalability, fail tolerance, definitely in all these cases, Cloud Foundry together with CAP or Kima will be the best solution. But microservice architecture not coming for free. That's still some applications, some projects need to be implemented in the monolith architecture or service-based architecture via RESTful ABAP, because cost of ownership still for the monolith platform will be less than for the microservices. And definitely you need to know and be able to operate the microservice architecture in complex environments. That is why it's complex decision for every customer, and usually you need to ask so many questions in advance and be able to understand importance of every quality attribute for customer.
Does it mean that you have kind of decision matrix?
Yeah, exactly. I have my favorite table with quality attributes and stars. For instance, if you decide to select RESTful ABAP, of course, platform will cost, operational cost will be less in comparison with microservices. Microservices, yes, really scalable, really.
Okay.
But it's not coming for free. It's coming for cost. You need to implement good pipelines. You need to be able to orchestrate everything. And I'm usually able, via the special table, explain advantages. And it's really well explained in the one really good book, Software Architecture, or no, Fundamentals of Software Architecture from O'Reilly. Exactly this table I'm
non-SAP.
It's non-SAP, yes, where just architecture templates described, and usually I have separate lecture about which platform you're able to use, and usually I able to classify, for instance, CAP. It's more like an architecture pattern for event-driven or microservice-based. Kima, it's more, or Kubernetes is more for serverless architecture patterns, but RESTful ABAP, it's like service-oriented architecture.
Okay, thanks. And Thomas, how does it work in Waldorf when big guys decide to build a new product? How do they select the platform? It is what? RAP, CAP Node.js, CAP Java. What the rationalize of the SAP here?
They probably do the same thing that our customers and partners do, and we have a very similar decision table. I share it in some of the presentations that I do that says, look at what skill sets you have available. If you have a team of ABAP developers, it's a fairly easy choice to choose ABAP on BTP or ABAP Cloud to do that architecture, because you're going to leverage their existing skill sets. But then there are the two other criteria that I look at that that aligns very well with what was just said. One is, what do you have to interoperate with? You know, are you connecting S4? Is it only S4? Are you connecting S4 to success factors? Are you connecting to non-SAP? You know, there are some differences in the way, you know, ABAP Cloud obviously shares the same data types and communication technology as S4. If you're primarily integrating with S4, you get some real advantages there. If you're interoperating with non-SAP or something like that, then CAP has some advantages. Both have capabilities, but you know, maybe you're going to have to work harder to connect to X as opposed to Y with the different programming models. And then finally, technical requirements, and this was just said pretty heavily. You know, cost of ownership along with scalability. Do I need to build an external facing website that has to scale to hundreds of thousands of simultaneous users? You know, I'm creating an eShop or something like that. Well, I'm probably not using the ABAP architecture for that. I probably want Kima with its you know, with its Kubernetes based scalability, failover capabilities, and stuff like that. But if I'm building a departmental app that's going to be used inside my enterprise for a few hundred people, then that architecture is probably way overkill, and I'm probably much better off with the ABAP architecture or a simplified CAP architecture deployed on Cloud Foundry. And it's a bit of a sliding scale. I like actually showing it on the scale of opinionation. On the ABAP end, you've got a programming model and architecture that's highly opinionated, where SAP has made much of the technical choices for you. You can focus on the business requirements. And you've got CAP with Cloud Foundry in the middle, where we made some of the decisions for you, but not all. You can plug in a third-party library, you can deploy it somewhere else. But if you deploy it to Cloud Foundry, we've provided the build packs, and a lot of the decisions have been made. You choose Node or Java, Node.js or Java. You choose memory, but we take care of the rest. Or you could write natively on Kubernetes and deploy directly to Kima or even Gardener, and you write it all yourself, right? And there you're making all the technical choices. But each of those come with pros and cons that we just laid out, and you've got to balance those out to make that decision. There's no one right or wrong answer for every customer, every partner, every particular application.
Okay. Yeah. Great to know this. And Thomas, I was and I'm still the big fan of you. And I remember you created this book 15 years ago, I think, Next Generation ABAP Development. And then the second version. But I haven't seen any books from you since, I don't know, 2010. Are there any plans? Because it's obviously now it's a new generation of ABAP developers. So are there any plans for the books?
I don't plan to write any books in the future. Books take so long to write and so much energy, and then by the time you get it out there, the next version is out, and you know, and it feels a little like, all right, I could put that same effort to publishing in other channels, and yes, I know some people still like the books, but and keep it more up to date. I mean, the stuff that we do on YouTube today, it reaches a younger audience of developers as well, that don't necessarily want to pick up and buy a book. You know, there's just there's so many options that make book authoring not super appealing if you've ever done it and know how much work goes into it. So no, I do plenty of stuff, but I don't plan to write a book. I leave that to other braver souls.
But then, what would you suggest to the new generation of SAP developers? Like the best, the top 3 or top 5 data sources, or I don't know, educational sources.
You know, they find them themselves pretty well. That's the thing about this generation, and you've got to put the content where they are. You'd be surprised. our number one growth area has been TikTok, the SAP TikTok channel, and we do 2-minute videos because that's about all you can do there, right?
Sorry,
2 minute.
who run this one? You run SAP
Um,
TikTok?
SAP owns it overall. My team contributes the developer content to the TikTok channel. You'll see other stuff on there. We have a single SAP TikTok channel, but we do 2-minute developer videos, and it gets a huge amount of reach, particularly with younger people. So they're learning about SAP technology 2 minutes at a time, which I would have thought was nearly impossible going in, but really resonates. But video in general, I mean, we've seen a huge explosion with the we use YouTube, now we use TikTok. Um, Lots of growth there, right? The other thing is hands-on. And I think that's developers have always, you read something, you want to go try it out. And that's why I personally put much more of my time into both code samples and tutorials these days. And I think the tutorials in particular guide people to get on the system, do something with the free trial or free tier. Those are really important aspects to learn. There's only so much you can learn by reading or watching somebody else. You got to do it yourself, and those tutorials will get you in there and doing it yourself.
And there was this resource, developers at sap.com.
Yes.
Is it still available? Still live?
Yes. Developers.sap.com. That's where the majority of our developer tutorials reside. You may see some of that move because we also have learning.sap.com. We have learning journeys there. I think over time you'll see the two come together into one website, but all the content will remain. We'll keep longer learning journeys, the more 40-hour long courses, but we'll continue to have we target like 45 minutes to complete a tutorial because my goal is always that somebody could do it over their lunch break, right? I want people to be able to sit down. Oh, I got a little time while I'm eating my lunch and do a tutorial and learn something. So I think that's the great starting point. That's the right amount of time to invest. 45 minutes here, 45 minutes once a week over 6 weeks, and you've really got a good foothold on a new topic.
Yeah, thanks, Sasha. And what are the top 3 books or, I don't know, developers tutorials for you for the SAP architects?
Oh, it's my favorite question. If you don't know answer on this question, it means that you shouldn't go to the interview with me. And I've already mentioned at least one, my favorite book. It's the Fundamentals of the Software Architecture from O'Reilly. And here its authors, it's Neil Ford and Mark Richards. And also you can find really good content, YouTube channel from Mark Richards, where he publishing so many really good videos about the architecture. And the second book, it's really simple one that usually I recommend as a first one for the developers. And the name of this book, it's a Software Architecture for the Developers. I even remember the author, it's Simon Brown. But unfortunately, I don't remember the authors for SAP architecture books. I'm really honest. And the first one, it's about really good book about SAP S/4HANA architecture. I really like it, and I read it just one year ago. But I really like the content, all concepts that described in one book. I really like it. And second one, it's really the most cool one that recently was published, unfortunately not by SAP. It's about SAP Business Technology Platform. Name of this something like Architecture Solutions with SAP BTP. At least this book right now allow me to share it with developers, and developers can easily, for instance, from Node.js, from Java, then can easily have a look and understand the key concepts behind the business technology platform, and it's making my life much more easier on many projects. Okay. For books, the most important one.
Any TikTok channels?
Oh, no. I more prefer open SAP learning or developers. Unfortunately, I don't have TikTok channel yet.
Okay. Yeah, I think I wanted this to be very fast. And many thanks, Sasha and Thomas, for this very quick discussion. And now we're going to proceed with Thomas. Hands-on introduction of SAP Cloud Application Programming Model. So this is going to be a hands-on demo from Thomas Jung. Thank you. And Thomas, there are going to be some more questions from the people after the hands-on session.
All right, sounds good. Let me just switch over to the screen sharing here. Yeah, what I wanted to take you through is really the cloud application programming model. And we're going to create an application from scratch using the cloud application programming model. It's going to give us a chance to show you the development experience, some of the development tooling, but also talk about how this plays into architecting applications overall. So I'm just going to start here. I'm just going to make a little directory here to get started in, and then in here, and I'm going to launch VS Code. And this is the first thing that I want to talk about is the development tools that you would use for developing cloud application programming model applications. You've got two choices here, and one of them is the SAP Business Application Studio, which runs in a web browser, and the other option is to do your development locally in Microsoft Visual Studio Code. And I've chosen pretty purposely to show you today the VS Code option, um, because I want to show you the openness of the environment. This is also personally how I do most of my development. Unless I'm working on a tutorial, then I'll often switch over to the Business Application Studio. I like having my code local to be able to run and test locally, and I'll show you all that even when I'm connecting to remote services on BTP. I'll show you how all that works as I go through the demo. The advantage of the Business Application Studio is obviously they get a complete development environment in the cloud. So if I don't want to install a lot of software on my local laptop, or if I work for a company where my laptop is very locked down, it can be advantageous to use the Business Application Studio because it is completely browser based. But if you have the ability to install the prerequisites locally, which for doing CAP development isn't all that much, you do need the Node.js JavaScript runtime installed locally, which I do have. And you need Microsoft Visual Studio Code as your IDE. But beyond that, there's not too much else that you need. So why don't I just go ahead and get started here, and we'll see what the experience is like. So first of all, I'm going to run a wizard. So I'm going to come into the command palette here in VS Code, and I'm going to tell it to open a template wizard. And this is where SAP has developed our functionality for doing development, like these wizards, these generators, and other functionality for CAP development, everything from code completion and syntax highlighting that are specific to our artifacts. We've developed all these as VS Code extensions. And those same extensions can run here locally on VS Code on my local laptop, or they can run in the cloud as part of the Business Application Studio. The Business Application Studio is based upon VS Code, and so you get the same kind of experience. And we only have to develop all the editors and plugins and wizards and other things once, and they run in either environment. And that's one of the beauties of this is the freedom of development that it gives you. I'm going to use the wizard to just say that I want to create a cloud application programming model project. And then we'll go to the next step. It'll load the specifics of this wizard. I'm just going to say demo. And you have your choice of doing either Java or JavaScript, Node.js based CAP applications. I'm going to personally choose JavaScript. That's my programming language environment of choice when I'm not using ABAP. I'm not much of a Java developer. I doubt I could stumble through a CAP demo using Java, to be honest. I work primarily in JavaScript, but that's also one of the nice things about the cloud application programming model is you have your choice of either of those runtimes and languages to work in. And I think it comes down a lot on this as well. The capabilities are very similar between the two environments, the Node.js and the Java environment for CAP. That it really comes down to what skill set your team has and what they're most comfortable using. And I'm going to go ahead, although I could just create a bare bones project, I'm going to go ahead and configure it for HANA deployment. I personally, although you can test using SQLite for local development, I like to go ahead and deploy my content to HANA right away. Use HANA Cloud running on BTP and test directly with HANA. Even when I'm doing local development, I'm going to connect to a remote HANA Cloud instance, and I'll show you how to do that when we get into this project pretty much right away. I won't show you much about the CI/CD, the deployment portions of this, but I'll go ahead and set this up for have a CI/CD, a continuous integration, continuous delivery build pipeline, and make it available for MTA-based business technology platform deployment as well. But we'll just go ahead and finish the wizard there. Just want to get a few other artifacts pulled up there. And this has created a basic project structure for me just by running that wizard. There. We have an app folder that will contain our UI portions. If and when we would add any UI, SAP UI 5 or Fiori to our application. But you'll see here how much you can do even without that, without having a custom UI. Then we've got our DB folder. That's going to contain our schema for our application and any other database artifacts that we might contain in our project. And then the SRV folder, that's going to be our service layer. So when we want to expose or write additional logic to expose as OData or RESTful services or GraphQL. I'll show you examples of all the possible outputs that you could have. Now, of course, we have an MTA YAML file. You might already be familiar with this if you've done XSA or HANA native development in the past. This is the deployment descriptor file that we need to deploy our application to Cloud Foundry. I will not do a whole lot with that today. Probably more interesting is the package JSON file. Now, this is the configuration file for CAP itself, particularly when doing JavaScript-based CAP. And you can see here, it's basically added a dependency to the SAP CDS. This is the Cloud Application Programming's main module. This is actually published out on the internet. So if you go to npm.js, the global node package repository, and you just search for SAP CDS, there it is, the Cloud Application Programming Model published out here for all the world to use. And you can see weekly downloads and things like that. So we're going to go, when we build our application, we're going to pull that from the internet. We also have another package here called Express. I'll pull that one up. This one's not provided by SAP. This is a very common open source module. You can see 28.5 million downloads a week there. So very, very commonly used. It basically sets up a web server written in Node.js. And this is going to be the web server that runs inside of the Cloud Application Programming Model. And that's one of the first things that you'll notice about if you come to this, say, from an ABAP background, where you're used to the entire application server being monolithic for one and being provided centrally and your app just deploys into it. Here, we're pulling the web server into our application, and it's going to run completely standalone, isolated. Our application, our little CAP application, is its own server. And this is considered a microservice architecture. Everything about it is self-contained. The other aspect is obviously compared to ABAP, where all the parts of the ABAP runtime, the ABAP application server, are written by and supplied by SAP. Here, we use a lot of open standard stuff inside of the cloud application programming model. A great example here is Express, being an open source, very standardly used in the community for JavaScript development. We didn't go write our own web server. We're going to use what's available there in the ecosystem. And that means that we get security patches and performance improvements provided by the open source community for a lot of these components. And you can pull in your own with CAP as well. There's some great open source library, something third-party library that's been developed that you want to pull in and use in the cloud application programming model. Very easy to do. There's over 1.5 million packages available in JavaScript NPN, and you can pull those in and use them in your own application. Now, the other side of that is that there are some out there that are maybe not so performant, maybe not even safe, and you want to be careful what you pull in and install as well. Ultimately, you're responsible once you pull a third-party piece of code into your project, but you have that ability to do it. And of course, SAP screens and has verified the stuff that we pull in, like Express. The last module that you see here, this HDB, this is also supplied by SAP. That's just not namespaced like the CDS one is. It's a little bit older, but this is the HANA database client. This is the library or the module that we're going to use to connect to the HANA database itself, that the cloud application programming model will use to connect to the HANA database. So at this point, I actually want to back up here. We've created our project. Close that down. Let's just so I gotta find my place. Now I am already connected. Just to show you here, I am already connected to Cloud Foundry. I just did a CF login, I'll just do a CF services to show you I'm connected to Cloud Foundry. But I have no HANA database that you see here. I have just HDI containers. I'm using HANA Cloud, and it is a environment agnostic version of HANA Cloud. The latest version that's available. It sits on neither Kima nor Cloud Foundry, but we can access it using HDI containers from either of those. So for my testing here today, I am going to use Cloud Foundry just for my testing. I'm not going to deploy my actual application to Cloud Foundry, but I will use the HDI container on Cloud Foundry to connect to it. Next, I don't want to miss a step here. Let's just go ahead and we need to install these dependencies. So I can go ahead and I want to get rid of. I don't really need a dev dependency for SQLite because I'm not going to use that. I'm going to deploy directly to HANA, and I'm going to kind HANA. So that should be enough to send this to HANA. So I want to install these dependencies, this SAP CDS, Express, HDB. They're not in my project locally. They're sitting out on the internet. So to install those from the internet, from NPN, I can just open a new terminal. Once my terminal opens, there it is. Took a little while. See, I'm here in the root of my project, where I see the package JSON. I can just run the command npm install, and it will read the dependencies that are documented in the package JSON, and it's going out to the internet and downloading those dependencies and installing them into my project. So you actually see this node modules folder that was created here just a second ago, and it's installing not just the 3 dependencies that you see here, the SAP CDS, Express, and HDB, but all things that are inside those modules that they are dependent upon. So it just installed all the libraries locally that I would need to do development and or run my application. All right. Next, why don't we create a couple of artifacts? I'm just going to make this a little smaller here for a second. That one. And I'm going to start by creating some database artifacts. So I'm just going to come here to the DB folder, create a new file. I'll just call this interactions.cds. File extension tells it that it's cloud application programming model. And so you don't have to watch me type. I've got a little simple solution here already that shows some of the things that we can do with the cloud application programming model. I've got a data type for countries that's actually defined centrally from SAP, and I'm reusing it in my model, just using this from SAP CDS Common. So all the common data types and other supporting metadata about those data types can be reused from the central framework. Very much like if you're, once again, coming from an ABAP development background, this is like using the data dictionary. And like ABAP, I can declare my own data types. So like this business key that I might use in more than one table, more than one entity, I declare it once centrally. So this is like a reusable data element or domain in the ABAP data dictionary. And then I declare entities. And for this, I'm creating tables. I'm creating a header table and I'm creating an item table. Pretty straightforward here with the data types. Here's my key. It's an ID. It's an integer. Then I've got a partner column and a logical date and a country of origin. And then the same thing for the items, a business key with some language and some long text. What's different here is building the relationships. I want to also define the relationships between these objects. And I've got two ways here. One, from the header, I'm creating a composition and saying that for every header, I can have 0 to many items that are children of that header. And the key word here, composition, means they can be treated as one unit. So if I delete a header, it'll automatically delete all the items. Or I can insert items as I'm creating the header. It has that fixed relationship. And I will not, it will enforce this with constraints so that you cannot enter any items that don't have a header record. So we're building up the database constraints, the joins, all the logic to enforce the way we want our tables, our entities to interact in the database, and we're doing that with the simple abstracted syntax. The same thing here on the items. We have an association back to the header. So if we need some header details, this gives us a join back to the header. So we'll have access to all the header fields from the item level as well. So let's go ahead before I build this and let's just put a service interface on here as well. So I'll come down here and I'll create another file in the service layer. I'll call this interaction. Oh, I can spell today. Interaction srv.cds. And here, I just want to say what I want to expose at the service layer. We want to take and say that we're using our data model from this other file. And that gives us the ability to expose both the header and the items as an entity in a single service. Now, I intentionally didn't say OData service because the technology that we're going to expose is actually agnostic here. CAP supports different interface technologies from a single definition. And I'll show you this later, that there's multiple things that we can expose here. And that's really nice because over time, as today we use a lot of OData, but over time, maybe something else becomes very popular. We want to be able to plug other interface technologies in here without having to rewrite our applications, change our definitions. So that's why the service definition here at the CAP level is not technology specific. I'll just go ahead and save that. And now I'm going to come back here to the command line. I'm just going to clear this so that we can see it a little better. And I'm going to use the command CDS. So this is going to use the CDS command line, the development kit. And I'm going to tell it to build my project. When I do that, it's taking my abstracted definitions, like this composition, the association, the data types even, and it's compiling them to HANA native in this case. You see it's creating HDB views, HDB tables, and it's also compiling the service definition to CSN JSON. So let's look at what it built here in this gen folder. You look at the DB level, then we see, for instance, HDB tables. Let's just look at that for a second. And let's actually look at that alongside the original here. So we take, we as developers work with this nice abstracted interactions header, ID integer, partner, this business key, string 10, would actually change that to nvarchar 10 using the HANA specific data types when it translated this into the database. So it's doing type translations to the specific database, and this composition, for instance, is being recompiled into associations into the database. So we see this many-to-many join and a many-to-one join on countries. Well, that was actually inherited from the common type. So we see that being brought in as well. Very similar, once again, those of you that are ABAP developers, if you're used to using the data dictionary, the whole SE11, when you hit activate behind the scenes, it's actually compiling a database specific version of the table or data types and sending those into the database. CAP is doing the same thing here, except, we can see these artifacts. They're ready to deploy here into the database, but they have not actually been sent into the database yet. It's only built the database specific versions of them. The next thing we want to do is we actually want to send these into the database. So let's go ahead and do that. What we need is we need a CDS. We need an HDI container in the database. It does not exist yet. I'll show you again. I'll do a CF services, and you see I've got a couple of these HANA HDI shared from other projects, but it does not exist in our database yet. So what I want to do is I actually want to write a little command here. Make sure I get my syntax right. To send this into the HANA database. So I'm just going to come here to the package JSON. Now I could just issue this command from the command line, but I'm going to issue it over and over again. So I can write a little script in the package JSON so to be saved for me, and it makes it easier to run these commands. And I'm just going to use CDS deploy, and that's the cloud application programming model has all the logic built into it to easily deploy this to the HANA database. And I'm just going to say, deploy it to HANA, and I'm just going to call this demo. I'm pretty sure I haven't used demo before here. Just want to make sure that the name is unique, because that's going to be the name of the HDI container that I wanted to create. And then I don't need this for an initial creation, but I might need it later if I'm doing changes to my data model. I'm going to add an auto undeploy. So if I make any fundamental changes to an object, undeploy it first before it tries to adjust and make any changes. So I'm going to save that. And now I can come to the command line here again. Let me just clear this so it's easier to watch. And I can say npm run HANA. And it's going to run the script that I've just added to my package JSON. And what you'll see it doing is CAP's going to take care of all the work for us. It did a CDS build behind the scenes to make sure it's up to date. And now it's actually creating the HDI container at the Cloud Foundry level, which in turn is creating the the schema and all the technical users in the HANA database. So this does take 30 seconds, a minute or so to create on the initial. So we'll just be patient here for a second. I'll set up my next thing that I'm going to do here. Hopefully it won't take too long. I can actually even pull up another window here, and I can do CF services, and we can see it. There it is, create in progress. So we can see it's being created for us. Keep refreshing that. That's still being created for us. Won't take too long, hopefully. All right, the create has succeeded. All right, now it's creating a key for us to be able to access it. That shouldn't take very long compared to the initial create. Yep, there it is. Now it's installing any HANA dependencies, and so it needs the HDI deployer. This is the first time that we've done this, so it's going out to the internet and downloading the deployer library, which is written in JavaScript, and now it's actually deploying it to the HANA database. There we are. See that? It's connected to the HANA database, it's deployed all the files, and it's sent it to the database. And interesting, I got a little error there at the end, but it did work successfully. Looks like it didn't do the interesting. Just run that command again. It won't take very long to run it the second time because it won't need to recreate everything again. So npm run HANA, just to show you. It compiled it again. It's using the existing container, so it does not need to create all that again. And now it's going to deploy once again. There we are. Now, one little thing that doesn't seem to be doing quite right here at the end, it should have done a CDS bind at the end. I don't see it actually doing that. So I will go ahead and add that myself. Well, yeah. And now it wrote a little file here that tells it how to connect to Cloud Foundry anytime that I want to use this service. We can already see that we have data, or that we have our tables created. If I come here and I do on a CLI tables, it's going to look inside this HDI container, and it's going to show us all the tables that were created. So our header and item table, our countries, and text for our countries as well. From here, I can also go ahead and launch the Database Explorer. I'll just say on a CLI DBX, and this is going to open the HANA Database Explorer. So if I need to do any additional things here that aren't that are HANA specific, for instance, load some CSV files into our tables, I can go ahead and do it here from the Database Explorer. This will also show you here in a second. I'll go ahead and let's connect to HDI container. So there it is. There's the one I just created. And there's our tables. So just to prove to you that I really deployed these into the HANA database, they are here and they are ready to use. I can do SQL against them. Now there's nothing in them yet. So let's just go ahead and import some data real quick. So I've already got some local files here that are ready to load. Header. That's imported into the database. So we got a couple header items. And let's do the same thing for the item. Import some data. There's my item. Import that into our table. There we go. We've got data in our tables. Check it. Yep. Not a ton of data. 4 records in the header. And a handful of records. Yeah, 6 records in the item. All right. So we created tables in the database using the Cloud Application Programming Model, and then used the Database Explorer to load some data into those tables. Let's go ahead and run these services now as well. So what I want to do here is I would just want to add another script. Once again, I could just run this from the command line, but I'm going to do it multiple times. And that's to do a CDS watch. CDS watch will let us test our application locally. So the only thing that I've deployed to BTP is the HDI container. I've deployed into HANA Cloud, but my application is still running completely locally here on my laptop. And I have the ability to test using this profile hybrid. It's going to run the application locally, but it's going to connect to the remote HANA database and let me test, debug all my code locally, but fetch data from the remote HANA database and read the table definitions and things like that remotely as well. So let me just do an npm run watch. And what you'll see here is my application is going to start up. And you see it binding to Cloud Foundry. It's connected to the HANA database. Now, I didn't have to input those credentials anywhere, and they aren't stored anywhere locally. It's only storing the endpoint and my org and space and the name of my HDI key, my HDI container. But then it's using my Cloud Foundry credentials every time I make a connection. So it's not storing my username and password anywhere, but using that to test. So it is connected to the remote HANA Cloud database running on SAP BTP, but then the CAP application itself, server listening on localhost 4004, well, this is running on my local laptop. And I can go ahead and open this in a web browser. All right, which monitor did that open on? Not that one. All right, where'd it go? There it is. Opened over here on my other monitor. I drag this over, and I already have a running test page where I can access my services. I can see the metadata of my OData service. I can come in here and I can test the OData service, so I can access the header. There's our 4 records that were in the header. You know, I can add things on here like $sign top equals 2. Just give me the top 2 records. There we are. So I've got a working OData service, and I can even, there's nothing in my app folder, right? I have not created any UI, but I can already run a Fiori UI against this. So for instance, I can come in here and now I don't have any annotations in my service, so it's not going to be the most beautiful UI, but it'd be a very basic UI to already test my application once it comes in here. It's taking a while to load today. There we are. You can even see the queries that it's doing behind the scenes that the UI is triggering. I'll click go. Oh, there's no visible columns because I have no annotations. No columns were visible by default. Let's go ahead and add our columns. There we are. Now we're seeing the column data come in. And once again, behind the scenes, you can see the queries that are being generated and that CAP is fulfilling to be able to run this application. So we get all that, the object creations in the database, the service layer. We got all that with this 33 lines of code. Was all we written for this simple application. Now, obviously, you can build a lot more into your application. With the cloud application programming model, this is a very simple solution to start, but it shows you the basic framework and how you can get started with the cloud application programming model pretty easily, and a little bit of what you can create. You've got HANA artifacts being created, we got an OData service being exposed, and we did that with pretty minimal effort here. I'm going to go ahead and stop this service. This was a very simple example, basically to show you what it takes to start things up. I'm actually going to close this now, and I'm going to come over here to a different solution that I've got ready. Now, what I have here is a little bigger application. Let's look at the data model first of all. This is a much larger data model, and this is actually a good opportunity for me to open with and show it to you in the graphical modeler. This all opens okay. Oh, what do I have? I have an error in here. That's what I get for. Yeah, I must have some errors in here that I had cleaned up. It does compile though, so we'll. I just can't show it to you in the graphical editor. That's what I get for doing things on the fly. This is a much larger data model, and you see other things in here. I've used some additional annotations to add checks. You can assert values within a range. You can set fixed values. Once again, very similar things to what you might be used to if you use if you're used to the ABAP data dictionary. We're really building out similar capabilities here. I've got value help definitions in here. It's all done through the same CDS syntax. The ability to add logic into my views. I have all this happening here in this particular model. Now, I've already built this model, and this one is pretty large. It is a set of multiple tables. This is a little demo model that I created. I actually ported it over from another language. This is for Star Wars. If you're familiar with the Star Wars movies, there's a little database that keeps track of all the characters, all the films, all the planets they go to throughout the Star Wars series. So it's a fun little data set to work with, but it's also reasonably complex because of all the relationships between everything. So I wanted to show you a little bit more complex example. It's also, 1,300 lines of code. So it's a much larger data set, many more entities. But I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and run this. I'll just do the same npm run watch. I've already deployed this to the HANA database in advance, but I'm testing it locally, just like I did the other one. I'm connecting remotely to my HANA database on in HANA Cloud, but then I'm running the rest of the application locally here. See it all connecting. That's good, and I'll go ahead and run it here. Let's just this side by side. And one of the first things you'll see, more complex, there are multiple services, there are multiple entities within each service. There's a bit more robust model. Let's look here at just the film service. So first of all, I've turned on some optional capabilities of the cloud application programming model. I'm going to show you how we have OData version 2 and OData version 4 capabilities, and how we can add Swagger UI for open API compatibility and testing, and how we can add GraphQL. And these are all things that you can get out of the box with just some simple configuration in your package JSON. For the most part here, like the GraphQL, I had to just add that to the configuration file of the package JSON. And for the OData v2 compatibility, there's an additional module that we need to add in, provided by SAP for version 2. Same thing with the Swagger support, some additional modules that we add to our dependencies, and then we're able to get this extra functionality. But this really shows us how CAP is very much protocol agnostic, particularly when exposing the services. Let's start with the Swagger UI. This is a cool additional feature that you can add into the cloud application programming model. One, it starts off with giving you a graphical representation of the entity data model. So it's reading, all the entities and the relationships that we've defined, and showing it to you graphically here. But I really like it because it's got this test tool built into it. So if I want to test my service, particularly post or delete operations that are a little harder to do from the web browser directly, because you can't just do it with the URL. You have to send a body into it. This Swagger tool will help you do all of that. Even for a get operation here, we want to get from the film entity all the parameters here, like top, skip, next, that I could do from the URL command line, are built in here for me in this tool. So if I just say try it out, it's going to get the top 50 records. Let's maybe say let's get the top 2 records, but skip 2, and let's just see what we get there. And there we can see the preview of the data. This is coming back in JSON. So we're seeing the films. So Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. So the 3rd and 4th movie in the Star Wars series, as is in numeric order, because we said give us 2 records and skip the first 2. So skip the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. But we can do other things here, like we can expand child entities. So I can just say expand planets. And now it's going to put records in there for each of the planets that were located, that were part of each film. So this can be a great test tool during your development. It can help you explore your services, basically be API documentation for these services. And this is the same specification that can then be exported into the API hub if you want to publish your service definitions. This all comes out of the box and built by CAP for you. Next, I'll go back here. I move that other tab. Go back to my start page. Now I have OData services for each of these. So like if I look at the metadata document, I see it by default, you get OData v4, version 4. That's what CAP defaults to. But maybe you need to have backwards compatibility with an older application, maybe one that's written in XS Classic or XS Advanced using OData v2 or NetWeaver Gateway that supports OData v2. No problem. You add this OData adapter proxy, and then you also get an OData version 2 metadata also exposed here as part of the data service version 2. So we support in parallel both OData v2 and OData v4 from a single service definition. I didn't need to create a second service definition. That single endpoint simply supports both of them. So I can run the OData service if I go to just my service and the entity name. By default, it returns OData v4. In fact, let me open this side by side here so you can kind of see the difference. So here's our OData v4 specification. And if I would run the same service, let's just run that with a slightly different URL, just adding dash v2 into the URL path, then it's returning OData v2. And you can see some of the differences here, although they're both similarly formatted. There are differences in OData v4 and OData v2. For instance, the child entities are not automatically returned in OData v4, where at least the URL to the child entities was returned in OData v2. So just some subtle differences between the two different versions of the specification. You see some different, like the formatting on the dates there is different as well between version 2 and version 4. But the cloud application programming model handles all those differences for you. And then we also have here a recent addition, since the end of last year, is GraphQL. So the cloud application programming model also exposes your services in GraphQL. It's a different syntax, it's a different protocol, similar to OData, it does many of the same things. But what we see here is a GraphQL query saying that I want to read Star Wars film. That's the service name. This is the entity. I'm telling it to order by a particular column. I want to return these columns. And then this is a child entity. So we're actually going to do an expansion on this and say the planets and give me the planet name and the terrain of the planet. This is just a GraphQL editor that helps you write queries, and it's really nice here because it knows the metadata model. So, for instance, here all the possible fields for this entity, like if we want to add the diameter of the planet as well, and the same thing up here on the film. In addition to the episode ID, maybe we want to add the well, we already have the title. Let's add the director of the film as well. And then we can run this query, and then we see the data returned. Rather similar to OData, but obviously the syntax of the way that you write queries, instead of being URL parameters, this is a special query syntax that GraphQL specification decides what it needs to be in. And this is just one more option that you can use for interfacing to your application. But I really think it's cool how we get this out of the box with the cloud application programming model. And like I said, I didn't add anything to my data model. I didn't have to code anything to get this extra functionality. It's just provided by the cloud application programming model. And last but not least, I want to show you one of the Fiori UIs that we could run out of this. So this is the people entity. So all the characters that appear in Star Wars films. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run this. But this is a pure Fiori UI. I haven't written any HTML, any SAP UI5. This is being built on the fly from the metadata specification. Now it'll probably take a few seconds to load the first time here because it's just loading the UI5 runtimes for this version in this browser. But while that's pulled up, what you can see here is I've used Fiori annotations. This is the people Fiori annotations to define the object page, the list. So all the layout of the UI is all defined here using annotations. Still load, taking all that long. It's just loading the UI5 libraries. It's taking its good old time to load the UI5 libraries, unfortunately. Preview took a little while earlier too. There it comes. And you actually see it running all the queries behind the scenes here on my service itself. And just like before, I can hit go. But this time I didn't have to choose my columns. All that's built in with the annotations. We also get things like value help. So we've got a nice set of value help here coming from the back end. This was all built with annotations as well. Um, Possible genders, the planets that everybody. And this is a complex value help, not just the planets, but the climate, the terrain of the planets, and the population. So I was able to build this complex value help all using annotations in the CDS model. And this even has full draft support. So I can come in here and I can start editing things. So let's just go into edit mode. And for instance, maybe I'll change the height of this person. And what you see here, updating draft. So even though I haven't hit save yet, my draft has actually it's saved a draft version into the database. And you have the options here. Oh yeah, I'm going to keep the draft. It's only going to be visible to me. And now I can see that this has a draft version. I can go back in and I can pick up my editing on this where I left off. See, it still has the 184. But anybody else that run this application would still see the old value, 183, because I haven't actually saved it into the database yet. We'll go ahead and save it. And that will persist the whole new version into the database. I get this full transactional application with draft support, value help, and I haven't written a single line of HTML, JavaScript, or UI5, all done completely with annotations. And that's one of the beautiful things about the cloud application programming model is I can build these full-blown applications, and all I really need to know is the cloud application programming model, the CDS syntax, the annotations, which if the other nice thing, many of the annotations and syntax are the same that you would use in ABAP RAP, the RESTful application programming model. So there's a lot of consistency between the two. Now, if one closing thing here before I wrap up, if you want to have a look at this whole application that, particularly the Star Wars one that I've been showing you here at the end, this is all published in the SAP Samples repository on GitHub. So you can go to SAP Samples, you can search for Star Wars or SW API, the Star Wars API. And you can bring the source code down. You can build it yourself. All the data is available in CSV files that you can load into the project. So if you want to set this up in your own environment, play around with it, you're welcome to do so. I think with that, I'm at the end of my demonstration of the cloud application programming model. I hope for those of you that maybe haven't seen it before, this helps to show some of the capabilities, what it's like to develop. Even if you have done cloud application programming model before, maybe I showed you some new features like the GraphQL, or what the development experience is like when developing locally in Microsoft Visual Studio Code. But with that, I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
Thanks a lot, Thomas, for an interesting topic. Yeah, we have a lot of questions in the Q&A section. Let's try to cover at least some of them. The first question from Vladimir's is, can you tell us the difference between the Java and Node.js stack in SAP CAP aside from the programming language? Additionally, it appears that SAP is placing more emphasis on promoting SAP CAP on Node.js. Could you share any insights into why it might be the case and what advantages Node.js offers over Java in the SAP CAP context?
Yeah, there aren't a ton of differences. We try to keep them functionally very, very similar, but they are two completely independent implementations. There's very little shared between the two because one has to be completely written in Java and the other is completely written in Node.js. for the most part, the differences are the programming language and whatever other factors that come from that, like how you build the project. You have a POM XML, in Java to define your dependencies, where you have a package JSON in Node.js to define your dependencies. But the way that dependencies are used, the functionality of the framework, like I said, we try to keep it nearly identical. Now, it so happens that a new feature may come to one or the other environment slightly before each other. Node may get a feature first, and then Java may get it in the next release, a month or so later. But for the most part, we do try to keep them in sync. So it really comes down, I think, which skill set you have and you're interested in developing it. Because I think, some people might say, oh, modern Java scales, it does scale differently than Node.js. Obviously, Node.js is single-threaded, event-based model, and Java is true multi-threaded. But I think in most use cases today, there's little to no performance difference between a typical CAP Node.js and a typical CAP Java. Certainly not from the standpoint most of the types of applications that we would be building using this framework. So it comes back to skill set and preference of skill set. And to the second part of that question, why do we favor JavaScript?
Yeah.
Because that's what we see more demand for. To be honest, there's some good synergies there because many people know JavaScript already from doing UI5 development or doing other front end development. So you've got a skill set that lends itself well to both front end and back end development. You've got a development community, at least in the SAP ecosystem. The JavaScript development community is larger than the Java development community, mainly because of that reuse of your skills from the front end. So it just it's just a little larger, and therefore more demand for it. Therefore, we give it a little bit of preference in that we generally deliver features there first. But both are fully supported, and like I said, the goal is to keep pretty good feature parity between the two.
Thank you. So the next question. SAP BTP has always been a platform that is used as complementary to other SAP applications like S/4HANA.
Mhm.
In the vision of BTP, do you see the BTP being used as an independent cloud platform in lines of AWS or Azure? And will a startup ever adopt BTP as their platform for their services?
Yeah, I mean, technically, you could deploy a completely non-SAP application on BTP, but that isn't really our goal to compete with the hyperscalers to be a pure hyperscaler, because ultimately we sit on top of the other hyperscalers. BTP is not a hyperscaler infrastructure in and of itself. It sits on top of GCP or AWS or Azure, or AliCloud in China. So we partner with the hyperscalers. We don't try to replicate the low-level services that they do. We build our services on top of those, and the majority of the BTP services are business focused and therefore align with the SAP applications portfolio. So that's why it primarily makes sense to use BTP in that context. But could you use it as a pure technology platform? Absolutely. Does it have its most value when it's combined with one or another SAP technology or being used to interface SAP to non-SAP? That's where we put most of our development time and effort into providing the best experience.
Awesome. Thank you. So next question. What is the idea of getting Kima instead of Cloud Foundry? Does Cloud Foundry have the same ABAP capabilities as Kima?
Oh, the same ABAP capabilities? ABAP doesn't actually run on, technically, it doesn't really run on Kima or Cloud Foundry. It is its own runtime. There are three primary runtimes in BTP, and that's ABAP, Cloud Foundry, and Kima. So depending upon what programming model you're using, you choose which one of those three to deploy to. So if you're using ABAP and the RESTful application programming model, you can only deploy to the ABAP runtime, right? Likewise, if you're using ABAP, you cannot deploy that ABAP to Cloud Foundry or Kima. It deploys only to the ABAP runtime. But if you're using the cloud application programming model or doing your own development from scratch, you have your choice to deploy to either Cloud Foundry or Kima. And they're both cloud native microservice-based architectures. They're both based upon open standards, but they are slightly competing open standards, right? So in the industry, we saw basically the development of two primary cloud native deployment and operation models, one being Cloud Foundry and one being Kubernetes. And Kima is the open source project name for SAP's version of Kubernetes. So you're really talking about Cloud Foundry standard versus Kubernetes standard. And there are differences in the architecture. Cloud Foundry takes this build pack approach and gives you a little less low level access. Takes a little different approach to service binding than what Kima or Kubernetes does. So ultimately, what I think it comes down to: do you want to do cloud native and microservice architecture, but you're maybe not super comfortable with building your own Docker containers and controlling your low-level deployment and your own network setup and things like that? That's where Cloud Foundry is really nice, because it has a lot of that built in for you and will make many of those decisions for you. You just pick your build pack, Node, Java, Python, whatever, and then it's a pre-configured environment. On the other end of the spectrum, do you want to design all your own very low level architecture, your own containers and things like that? Kima and Kubernetes in general gives you that functionality and gives you the ability to really get in there and tinker and scale things to the nth degree. So if you have, you have to integrate something that wasn't built for Cloud Foundry, you have to have basically the ultimate in scalability and redundancy, and you don't mind getting in and working at that rather low level of definition and setup and operations, then Kubernetes/Kima is a good option for you.
Okay, thank you. So while you're generating new questions to have a chance to bid for our cool prize, we encourage you to join our community on other social networks like Facebook, Telegram, LinkedIn, and of course, we're a community platform via the links in the chat. And also, don't miss the registration for our upcoming SAP Tech Talk on innovating marketing solutions. The details are coming soon. So we still have some time for some other questions. The next question is there a plugin for Visual Studio Code which provides the same workflow editor as it is installed in SAP Business Application Studio by default?
The workflow editor. I'm not sure off the top of my head. That's not one that I've used. I mean, there are many plugins available for Visual Studio Code, like the Cloud Application Programming Model, the mobile development, the Fiori development tools. But I don't know if we have a workflow one. Let me just search real quick. And I'm not seeing. I'd have to follow up with that one. I don't know if workflow is one of them that we have a plugin published for VS Code. I'm not seeing one. I know the major ones are, like I said, the Cloud Application Programming Model itself, some of the HANA tooling, which I didn't actually show there. There's a light version of the Database Explorer that's actually available as a plugin. The mobile development experience and the Fiori tools. Those are all available as VS Code plugins.
Okay, thank you. So one more question. Is SAP going to improve CAP extensibility framework and make it like as an ABAP extension framework where we're able to enhance all classes and all transparent tables and structures via append structures in ABAP dictionary? On the other hand, we're able to extend only predefined objects like entities tables in CAP.
Yeah, it is focused on extending the data model. But there have been some recent improvements to the extensibility, particularly for multi-tenant applications. That was delivered right at the end of the calendar year last year, 2022. Um, so we continue to make investments there on extensibility. Will you see exactly the way ABAP works? I don't know. With I mean, ABAP has the ability, because it's our own virtual machine, and we compile the code ourselves. We can more easily hook code in at a low level. I don't know if we'll ever quite get to that point of like implicit enhancement points that we have in the ABAP world, but we're definitely trying to recreate much of the rest of the extensibility experience. Adding your own elements to entities, adding your own associations, extending domains with new values, things like that. Uh, was a real starting focus, and then the ability to hook some of your own logic in at fixed points, at the major exit operations, the read operation, the bootstrap, things like that. You can do already. But yeah, like I said, whether we'll ever get to the level that ABAP has with enhancement implementation points, I don't know. I I kind of see that being problematic to deliver that level of enhancement.
Thank you. And the last question for today, is there a plan to transform SAP CAP into an open source project?
Well, actually, there's been some work on that. Some parts of it have been open sourced already, like the GraphQL adapter is open source, and we have some open source projects that the community has that plug into CAP, like the Postgres adapter was developed by the community. So there's like two ways that we would do that: by open sourcing some of the modules themselves, and by having some APIs that allow plugins, open source created plugins, to come into CAP. And throughout this year, there's going to be more parts of it that move into the open. There was a recent blog post by by the lead architect talking about the plans. I think it was just in the developer news last Friday's episode of the developer news. We talked about this as well. So this is very much an ongoing thing, and where we probably won't be able to open source every bit of it, but there's definitely some movement there happening.
Thank you. So, since there are a lot of questions, unfortunately, we are not able to cover all of them in terms of the event. Answers to the rest of the questions and the winner of the prize drawing will be shared with you later in our groups. Thomas, thanks a lot for your participation. You really nailed it. So, as already mentioned, our today's webinar recording will be posted on our SAP Tech Talks YouTube channel. The links to the recording will be sent separately. Colleagues, thank you very much again for your participation and see you soon.